Nobody does primetime football quite like the Baltimore Ravens. And I hate to say I told you so, but I think I told you so. As the Ravens take down the Buffalo Bills 35-10 on Sunday Night Football. Welcome to Ravens Talk. I'm your host, Samuel Njoku. We'll talk all about that big win for the Ravens on Sunday Night Football. We'll touch on the pivotal matchup. Division rival, Cincinnati Bengals. The Ravens travel to Cincinnati. Travel to the jungle to take on the Cincinnati Bengals. We'll also talk about the trade rumors that have been circulating involving the Ravens. So a lot to get to. You want to stick around to get my thoughts on that. But first, Ravens take care of business against the Buffalo Bills and to do so in dominant fashion. We mentioned 5 touchdowns by the Ravens, rushing, passing, whatever you want to call it. The Ravens were doing it, and the Bills could not stop the Baltimore Ravens. And we talked about it last week. The Ravens were set up for success. It was a nightmare matchup for the Bills, and it came to fruition early. How early? How about the first play of the offensive snap for the Ravens? As an 87-yard touchdown by Derrick Henry pretty much sets the tone for the rest of this contest. And again, we talked about it last week. The Bills play a very basic style of football. They have their 4 guys at the line, and they dare you to throw the teeth of that defense, which is their secondary. But when you have a power run team like this, it forces the defense to change their identity, change who they are. The Bills were not going to do that in the first few plays of the game. And in fact, the first play of the game, you saw just that, the 87-yard run, and almost instantaneously, the Bills defense had to decide to change what they do. And of course, if you don't have practice doing that, you're not going to have much success. So it was more of the same for the Bills, even though they changed their defensive philosophy. I called it. I mean, what else can you say? I'll pat myself on the back right now. If you watch the podcast, if you listen to the podcast, you get a good start. You get a feel for this ahead of time. So make sure you tune in for these analyses. And I'm sure you're begging to hear my analysis for that Bengals game. I know a lot of Bengals fans, Ravens fans go head to head on the social media. So I'm sure you're interested in seeing what my thoughts are on the game. You'll get that a little bit later. But enough about the offense. I'm sure you heard all week about the offense and how they performed. Derrick Henry's ground player of the week. Just doing this thing. But that defense showed me something. We talked about it. Can the defense steadfast, hold fast for 4 quarters? Can they lock in? Can they finish? Boy, did they. Besides the breakdown in coverage with Josh Allen extending plays like he does very well and creating that touchdown pass, the Ravens really held fast. They really locked in. Marlon Humphrey looked great. Nate Wiggins looked fantastic. Kyle Van Noy, as of this week, he has 6 sacks. Aiden Hutchinson has 6.5. So they're neck and neck in the sack race. And that's unbelievable for a 33-year-old, somebody that was pretty much brought off the street for the Ravens for the second time in his career. So that is a great, great defensive performance by the Ravens, overshadowed, of course, by the dominant play by the Ravens offense. But I love what I saw from that defense, and they're going to need to continue to build on that as pivotal offensive, explosive teams are coming into fruition for the Ravens. Up next, the Cincinnati Bengals. We'll touch on that a little bit later, but the Ravens will have their litmus tests. We're going to find out what this team is about, but you cannot complain about what you saw from the Ravens in week 4. No fourth quarter letdown, no lead deficit erasures, just dominant football from the Baltimore Ravens on defense. Let me get back. We'll talk about some trade rumors involving the Ravens, because this may be a good thing for the Ravens going in. Of course, there's some caveats to that. If you're a Ravens fan, I know you know what I'm talking about, but we'll touch on it next on Ravens Talk. Welcome back to Ravens Talk. As you mentioned it, the Ravens dominated the Buffalo Bills. They just beat them down. The Bills came in 3-0, red-hot team. You had pundits talking about how Josh Allen's the better quarterback than Lamar Jackson, how you take him over Lamar in any given situation, how the Bills are poised to win the Super Bowl finally. No Stephon Diggs for the Bills. Everything was Bills-centric, and the Ravens turned the page in a big way, and now the Ravens are the focal point of attention for a lot of teams. But not just teams, players as well. Davante Adams, wide receiver for the Las Vegas Raiders, has requested a trade to get out of there. He did defeat the Ravens in week 2. Gardner Minshew led team, I should say, got the job done against the Ravens. Maybe Davante Adams saw something in the Ravens that piqued his interest, because the Ravens have been listed as one of the teams that either Davante Adams is interested in or have made a contact with the Raiders concerning the availability of one Davante Adams. What a trade that would be. Now, let's just lay down the groundwork. We know we're not a biased podcast here. We speak about the facts and we analyze the situation based on those facts. Here are the facts. The Ravens cap space, not looking great. Here's the facts. The Ravens don't really like to trade premier draft picks for players, especially those at the twilight end of their career. We may think that Davante Adams is still in the prime of his career, and in some aspects he is, but he does turn 32 at the end of this year. And there are young players, Kyle Hamilton, Tyler Linderbaum, Zay Flowers, Odafe Oweh, who may be more of a priority as far as signing to get those guys in. If you bring in a guy like Davante Adams, you likely have to extend a guy like Davante Adams. And you have to make void contract years to bring him in to not destroy your cap in some way, shape, or another. So a lot of factors go into bringing in Davante Adams, but you saw what the Ravens were able to do without him. Imagine what the Ravens were able to do with him. So if you ask me if the Ravens should make a trade for Davante Adams, I say probably not. But would I be upset if they do make the trade? Absolutely not. I mean, we see what the opposing defenses are doing to the Ravens on passing downs. They're blanketing Mark Andrews. Blanketing a tight end is way easier than double teaming a receiver, because if you double team a tight end, it's very simple. The majority of the time, you do have lots of bodies in the middle of the field to really deviate the quarterback from making those throws. But double teaming a receiver on the edge, that shifts your entire defense one way, open space on the other side. Imagine the open field in the middle of the field for Derrick Henry, Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, Zay Flowers to make plays while Davante Adams is blanketed. And Davante Adams still a phenomenal receiver enough where double teams may not be enough. So you talk about a situation like that, it makes 100% logical sense to bring a guy in, but the cap space is an issue. It'll be a huge hit. Think about the future. You can't just think about the now. Even though the Ravens are on win now mode, and I'm sure the Raiders have had conversations with the Raiders involving potentially helping them out with that contract, taking some of that money away from the contract in order to give the Ravens room to bring him in. So do I think the Ravens bring in Davante Adams at the end of the day? No, that's not their MO, but very enticing to think about. Very fun to think about. If you had to ask me who Davante Adams goes to, I'd probably say the Saints. I don't think the Raiders are looking forward to sending to an NFC team. I've heard people mention perhaps the Chiefs being a team that they trade to. Why would the Raiders trade to a divisional opponent? Why would they bolster the offense of a team that they can't stand already, who's already beaten them on multiple occasions, who've won multiple division titles? Doesn't make sense, so I don't see it happening by any stretch of the imagination. But I can see the Jets pairing them up with Aaron Rodgers during their time at Green Bay. I do see the Saints with Carr being there when they were together in the Raiders and they're being best friends and, all that. So I can see something like that happen. I can see the Steelers throwing the book at the Raiders to make something happen. You definitely don't want to see Davante Adams in yellow and black or gold and black, whatever you want to call it, in the Steelers nation. But I don't see the Ravens being the team that gets it done. Conversations have been had. I mean, we can all say that. Ian Rappaport reported that. So conversations have been had regarding Davante Adams, but at the end of the day, the cap is the cap, and the Ravens are trying to be a winning organization for years. And having a player like that come in and pretty much dismantle your books really hinders the fact of that matter. You bring it up, the Ravens haven't really had a rebuild year since 2017. I mean, if you think about it. So the Ravens do a good job of keeping guys in the contracts that are team friendly, releasing them when those contracts are no longer friendly enough for the team. And Davante Adams' contract is basically saying, I'm the best in the league. So you're going to pay the best receiver in the league money. And I'm not sure if the Ravens are prepared to do that. So obviously fun to talk about, to have Davante Adams on the roster, to have him be in that offense, paired with the most dynamic quarterback in NFL history, the most dominant running back potentially in NFL history. So, fun to talk about, but at the end of the day, I do not see it happening. If it does, how do you not win a championship with that roster? How do you not? When we come back, we'll talk about the Ravens-Bengals matchup. Division rival, first division opponent for the Ravens this season. Can the Ravens build upon their performance against the Buffalo Bills and get the job done and get over 500 for the first time in 2024? We'll talk about it next on Ravens Talk. Welcome back to Ravens Talk. Again, we mentioned it. Ravens-Bengals, huge matchup. The Bengals pick up their first win against the Carolina Panthers this year, and the Ravens pick up their second win in a row in dominant fashion. on Sunday Night Football, and all eyes have turned to the Ravens as being one of the premier teams in the AFC. But division games are a different beast. We've seen it all the time. The Steelers finding ways to win in situations where you just can't imagine the job getting done by the Gold and Black. The Browns being feisty enough to get a win, snatching victory out of the jaws of defeat in 2023. So it's very difficult to analyze this game. But let's look at it from purely a football standpoint and let the football gods do what they do. Matchup-wise, this is another tough one for the opposing defense. The Bengals do not have the personnel right now to combat this offensive juggernaut that is the power run game that the Ravens currently run. The Bengals are, it looks like Trey Hendrickson may be a game time decision. He was limited in practice this week, so his availability is in question. And Trey Hendrickson, we talked about it for weeks, being one of those premier pass rushers that could potentially wreak havoc on the Ravens. And now we're seeing that even if you do have a premier pass rusher, it does not necessarily mean that you have what it takes to stop this team. You'll need to combine it with blitzing, and not just blitzing, effective blitzing, being able to disguise and mask what you're doing. And the Bengals do have, I guess, a familiarity with this team, being a division opponent. So there are nuances to the game that we need to control and aspect and look at when we talk about this game. But on paper, and the film I've seen on the field for the Bengals, it's going to be tough for them. And they're going to have a difficult time, though. The Bengals do blitz a little bit more than the Bills. I think that was one of our deciding factors when determining the outcome of this game. The Bills were dead last in blitzing, but the Bengals, I should say, are around 23, 24th in terms of blitz rate. So they don't blitz often either. The Ravens don't blitz either. But when you're playing a run-heavy team like this, and when you have, I guess the word I would use is lacking in experience, the way in which the interior line does for the Ravens, it gives opposing defensive chances to fool them. You saw that early on with the Chiefs and the Raiders on Daniel Falele and Andrew Voorhees and not much Patrick McCarr, because Patrick McCarr does have some experience, but the two guards for the Ravens are definitely lacking in experience, and teams are taking advantage of that. Not so much this time, but if you want to have success, I suggest blitzing, and that's something that the Bengals do not do often. Also, the Bengals do not crowd the box very often. Even in the two games against the Ravens last year, they didn't play a lot of heavy box formations, very light boxy in terms of their defensive foundation. In fact, this year so far, they're ranked 10th in the league in terms of their light box rate. So they do not have 8 guys in the box very often. And you're going to need 8 guys in the box to stop Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson. So the Bengals will need to deviate from that approach. Now, unlike the Bills, the Bengals don't really have to teach themselves to be that defensive mindset of keeping those guys in the box. They played the Ravens twice. They know they need to have extra bodies in the middle of their defense in order to stop them. So you may see more of that. But I know that's the film from last year. The Bengals didn't really do that. They really didn't load the box against the Ravens. Now, they better do that this week or they're in trouble. But the Ravens also passed the ball quite a bit more in those contests. I don't think they'll be doing that here. I think the Ravens will count on their defense to hold off Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, and Jamar Chase, and lean on Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson to lead the way on the ground. So very interesting, that matchup. I don't think it's as nightmarish as a matchup as it was in week 4 against the Bills, but there's still glaring deficiencies that the Bengals need to take into account. Their secondary is pretty good. I mean, they may not be playing like it right now, but their secondary is decent. They're built to stop Patrick Mahomes. It feels like this defense is built to stop Patrick Mahomes, a la in previous years where the Ravens defense were built to stop Ben Roethlisberger and the Pittsburgh Steelers. So I think the Bengals are equipped well enough to stop the pass. They've had some struggles in the past so far with the passing game as far as defending it. So I don't see them being much of a threat, but something to watch out for. I really like what I saw from them against the Chiefs. And if they bring that same mindset against the Ravens, it could be a big day for that defense. But it all starts with stopping the run. Can you stop the run and make the Ravens one-dimensional so that you're in those situations that are favorable to you? We'll see. Again, I don't think it's going to happen like that, but the Bengals have shown that they're a team to be reckoned with. So let's see what happens. Now, on the opposite side, we talked about it last week. The Bills didn't have a receiver the likes of CeeDee Lamb. They didn't have a receiver the likes of Travis Kelce or Devontae Adams. So the Ravens really weren't pressured to be on their P's and Q's like that. They let their talent speak for themselves on the field. This week, not so much. You got T. Higgins, you got Jamar Chase. We've seen what they can do to the Ravens in the past. We'll see. The Ravens defense, +1 on my category is being able to defend the pass, but it's a different beast. They have had success without Marlon Humphrey. Remember, Marlon Humphrey didn't play in those matchups last year against the Bengals. Having Marlon Humphrey in, having a Nate Wiggins, who in my opinion is playing great football. Those 2 dropped interceptions, of course, you don't want to see that. I'm sure he's getting flack for it, but making yourself be in position to make those plays makes me feel very good about what the Ravens are deciding to do. And that's keep Nate Wiggins on the outside with Brandon Stephens and have Marlon Humphrey in the middle. Pick your poison. It's why Brandon Stephens being targeted so much. Do you want to throw it on Marlon Humphrey, who's an all-pro? You want to throw it against Nate Wiggins, who's one of the faster corners in the league and pretty much adept. Their football IQ seems to be pretty high for a rookie. I don't know. So Brandon Stephens needs to have a big day. I think it'll be him that gets targeted a lot, especially by T. Higgins, who's predominantly on the outside on most of their passing situation on the Cincinnati side. So I think the defense will be playing well, but that's the matchup that we'll have to watch. I think in some regards, they're 2 sides of the same coin. They're both equally as talented. The Bengals offensive pass and attack and the Ravens defensive back. So, the best man win. But when it comes to the Ravens offense versus the Bengals defense, it's Ravens all the way. When we come back, we'll get my prediction about that Ravens game. Bengals are coming to try and even the score as far as the standings go, to be 2-3 and catch up with those Pittsburgh Steelers. But the Ravens have something to say about it. Will they go into 3-2 and get inch closer to that division title that they've already hold in 2023? We'll talk about it next on Ravens Talk. Welcome back to Ravens Talk. Ravens-Bengals, division matchup, 1 p.m. Eastern time. Winner moves closer to those Pittsburgh Steelers, and depending on the outcome of their game, the Ravens could be sitting tied for the top spot in the AFC North. Do they get the job done? I think so. It's hard to win on the road, especially in the division game, but the Ravens have shown that they can handle the Bengals. I just don't know, again, if that Bengals defense has enough in the tank to stop this offensive juggernaut that is the power run game. Again, we mentioned Trey Hendrickson may not even play. Murphy, they do get Murphy back, so that's something that the Bengals do hang their hat on, the fact that they most likely will get him, but that may not be enough to stop Derrick Henry. They'll need to change their philosophy a little bit, something that I'm sure they've been able to train themselves on being a division opponent, but as far as talent goes, I just don't see it happening. Give me the Ravens, 30-13, big win for the Ravens, and they move on to their Week 6 opponent. Maybe the Bengals prove me wrong. Again, we talked about it. The Ravens have had troubles holding fourth quarter leads. If it were not for that Kyle Van Noy strip sack, the Bills, I should say, were driving to potentially score again before being halted. So we'll see. Joe Burrow doesn't really extend plays, something that I think is a detriment to this defense. So the benefit goes to the Ravens defense, in my opinion. Could be wrong. I've been wrong before, but give me the Ravens winning big, 30-13 on Sunday, and move on to Week 6, which I believe is against the Commanders. We'll talk about it next week, but that's going to do it for us here at Ravens Talk. Thanks for joining us. Big week for the Ravens. Thanks so much for all the kind words. I know you guys have been talking about how I guessed right, as you can say, but it's just analysis. And when you boil down to it, it's all about chess, and nobody plays chess better than me. And nobody plays chess better than the Baltimore Ravens, it seems, because they were very prepared for that matchup. We'll see if they're prepared for the next one. We'll talk all about it. If the Ravens get the job done or if they fall short, tune in for Ravens Talk, and I'll see you next week.